My name is Alfred Geiger, and I was born here, so they say, in 1930. My father was born in 1879. He was 51 when I was born, and lived in this same area all his life. So I got a lot of history from him because of being in the same area continuously for all those years. And he was 12 years old when his family moved out of a log cabin about a third of a mile from here and into a new house. His family had been through yellow fever epidemic, in which none of the family got yellow fever, but they stayed away from Jacksonville for 3 months or so, hoping that would help keep them from getting yellow fever. And when Jacksonville burned up in 1901, they watched the smoke and heard all about it. I am the youngest of 6 children, and most of them were born over about a mile from here where they lived before they built this house. My father and my mother and one of my uncles got together to build this house, and they asked a professional carpenter for advice and told him they were going to build a house. And they wanted some advice on building houses. None of them had ever built a house before. The carpenter just shook his head and said, use plenty of nails. So this house has plenty of nails. Through the Depression during the 1930s, the farm survived anyhow. And it was a combination of a small herd of beef cattle, a few dairy cattle, just enough to produce our own milk and butter and cheese, and we drank milk in quantities. I can remember when I was small, my mother figuring that everybody drank at least a quart of milk at every meal. The farm also consisted of chickens, horses and mules, of course, and we had sheep. I think that we were the only farm in Duval County that had sheep for some of those years, because this is not sheep raising country. And we, of course, every year made cane syrup. Syrup was a real staple. The syrup was on the table all the time, just like salt and sugar was on the table. The table wasn't set unless the syrup pitcher was on the table. And we stopped making syrup for practical reasons way back in the 50s, and I figured about 27 years later, if I remember rightly, that I wanted my children to see how it was done, and I managed to get some nice seed sugar cane, good cane for handling with bare hands, doesn't have prickers on it. And we planted cane and actually made syrup again after having practically forgotten about it for 27 or so years. And the children, of course, had a big time sharing in all the work and getting it done. And it turned into a little family reunion time at the same time. So we've been doing it periodically ever since. This little plow is maybe 100 years old. It's for making a small furrow for planting sugar cane or whatever else you want to plant. We plant actual pieces of the stalk We don't use seeds in this climate. The sugarcane doesn't have a long enough growing season to produce seeds in this climate. Plant is just a piece of a stalk at a time. They have little buds that'll sprout at each one of these knots. And there's a bud on the opposite side, as you go down the stalk. That one looks like it's got one good bud there, another good one there. About that long is perfect length. We don't want them too long. If we plant a long stalk like that, it'll probably sprout at one end and won't bother to sprout anywhere else.
Oh, okay.
So we cut it into pieces and then you have more sprouts. This is called stripping, where we strip the leaves off of each stalk. Requires quite a bit of muscle to do each stalk like that. And the stalk is sweeter toward the bottom and not so sweet toward the top, so we always guess where the best place to cut the top off is. That's not a machete, but it's quite like a machete, and very good sort of a blade for chopping. but you just have to make sure it stays in your hand and doesn't slip loose. It can be quite dangerous. That's an old engine, World War I vintage. The Fairbanks Morse, about 3 horsepower, 475 RPM, never been overhauled. They're building the fire under the boiler. It takes a little while for things to get warm before putting the juice in. And the old mill is over 100 years old. It was meant to have a steam engine running it, but we run it with that ancient Fairbanks Morse motor. And it still works fine. Looks as if it'll last forever. Squeezes the juice out of the cane very nicely still. And I guess it would be considered dangerous by OSHA if it were built nowadays, but back in those days it was considered perfectly safe. Fortunately, never had any bad accidents with it. To this day, I think we can still get parts for it, even though it's more than 100 years old. Unfortunately, I don't know what its original cost was. The cane that comes out of after it's been squeezed is called bagasse, and it's very good for mulch. The old Fairbanks Morse engine produces a lot of steam. It just simply boils water when it gets hot. That's my grandson Ry feeding sugar cane into the mill. The juice is much sweeter than maple juice. Doesn't take as much boiling as maple juice does. About maybe plus or minus 3 hours of boiling. The boiler is full of just plain water to begin with. You don't want the boiler, the actual kettle itself, to get too hot. The juice is dipped out of the barrel and put in a wash tub to carry to the boiler. when we get ready to put the juice in, then we have to take the water out quickly, put the juice in. And it has to be done quickly because you can't afford to let that cast iron get too hot. So there goes the first juice into the boiler. The juice has a very unappetizing greenish look to it, but once you touch your tongue to it, it is very sweet. Put in something like 55 gallons of juice. It's called an 80-gallon boiler, but you need plenty of space for it to boil up. So if it wasn't boiling, the juice would be several inches farther down from what you see there. Constant skimming is necessary to get impurities out of it. Otherwise, the syrup will not be clear, and if it's done properly, it becomes very nice, clear syrup. Now it's not boiling so hard, and this is a good time to wipe the impurities off the side of the boiler. It boils at higher than 212 degrees. It's hotter than ordinary water boiling. The thicker the syrup is, the higher the boiling temperature. Keeping the fire going is something that is a constant job. And hauling off the bagasse or squeezed remains of the cane makes very good mulch under grapevine. There it is, boiling high again. That's a good time to wipe the impurities off the side. All the skimmings that are wiped off make very good hog feed if there are hogs available to eat it. It will ferment very fast also. Hogs will get drunk on it if it's kept too long. Then it's very important to be all prepared ahead of time to take it off at the proper moment. If it cooks a little too long, it can suddenly turn into pull candy, which tastes like strong molasses, and so it's not good if it cooks a little too long. And the hydrometer, the Bohm scale hydrometer, has been in the family since perhaps 1937. Measures the specific gravity, and we take it off at about 35 on the Bohm scale. So if it gets up to 30, you might think that there's some time left, but by the time it gets to 30, it's about time to check it over again right away, because it'll move right up and suddenly get away from you, and you don't want it to get away from you. So it was decided at the right time to take it off. If the boiler is washed off immediately, it's easy to do. Don't want to wait long on that, or it'll suddenly be very hard to wash it off. In the old days, we would have 2 or 3 weeks of cane grinding, and we got very efficient at getting one boiler off and starting to bottle it up and getting the next boiler going right away. We celebrated my granddaughter Hannah's birthday at cane grinding also. This is my father's first motor vehicle, a 1919 Model T. The Model T served as a school bus as well as a family car and delivery truck. Then it was time to taste the new syrup, French toast. In the old days, the syrup pitcher and salt and pepper were all on the table. One was always on as much on the table as salt or sugar. And the syrup pitcher is made so that if it's used properly, it doesn't drip down the side of the syrup pitcher.